Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, HR Compliance and Insurance Benefit Perspectives, What Employers Should Be Aware of as New Cases Emerge, presented by Ray & Associates and Huntington Insurance. My name is Imani Fields, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. First, if you have any questions during today's presentation, you may enter them into the chat box on your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, to be respectful of your time, we know that we will not be able to get to them all. Therefore, following today's webinar, we will review all questions and send out the answers via email as soon as we can. When you receive this email, you will also receive the recording of today's presentation, as well as a link to participate in a very short evaluation. Please take a few minutes to share your thoughts about the presentation as a whole, the information provided, and our presenter. Your feedback is important to us as we determine future webinar topics. Also, if you'd like a copy of today's slides, you'll find that they're available in the handout section of the webinar dashboard on your computer screen. Today's webinar will be given by Renee West, Lisa Smith, David Leff, and Alison Enrico. Renee West is a senior manager and leader at Ray & Associates HR Consulting Practice. Director of Ray & Associates HR Consulting Practice. Go Renee. With more than 27 years of experience in human resources, Renee specializes in assisting organizations within the manufacturing, nonprofit, contingent staffing, food, and other industries with their HR challenges. Lisa M. Smith, Vice President of Huntington's Insurance Compliance and HR Benefits Innovation Department. Lisa has been an employee of benefits industry since 1997 and expanded her experience to the insurance industry in 2005. Lisa's responsibilities encompass aspects of human resources, employee benefits, and regulatory compliance for Huntington's clients and colleagues. David Leff holds a strong professional background helping colleagues and clients understand risk, improving safety performance, and implementing programs to create a positive safety culture. As Vice President of Insurance Loss Control at Huntington Insurance, a few of his career highlights include improving facility safety through engineering, design, and implementation, designing and supervising the implementation, and set the direction for online tracking software to encompass all his EHS functions, metrics, and more. And lastly, Alison Enrico, a benefits coordinator at Ray & Associates, assists employees with benefits enrollments and questions, ensure compliance with required benefits notice, research and identify benefit plans that will build our brand and continue to attract and retain top talent. And now I will pass it on to Renee. I know that was a mouthful.
Great, thank you, Imani. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time, and also an extended thank you to the individuals from Huntington Insurance and also Allison from our Ray team in putting all this content together. So here we are again, continuing to talk about HR compliance and COVID. Our goal here today is to provide you with an array of information. And again, any questions that you might have, we will cover those at the very end. But we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. So next slide for me, please. So one of the biggest topics and questions that we received this week relates to the FCRA Leave, which was voluntary for employers to offer to their employees for any eligible COVID criteria for any leave that they would need. This has actually expired as of September 30th of this year. And we've received many questions from clients and organizations about for example, we have employees that actually were off on September 30th, and we paid the FCRA leave for them. Do we still receive that payroll credit for them on that tax? Yes, you do. Any wages that you are paying for the COVID criteria that meet that eligibility through September 30th are eligible for that tax credit. It does not matter when they're being paid. So if they're paid October 1st or October 2nd, it's as long as they work through that time. So that was one of the biggest questions. At this time, we have not heard about any extension, any new leave at this time. That could change given the current situation with the cases. But at this point, there is no longer any FCRA leave available. So that's important to know for employers and for your employees if they have questions. So a lot of companies are thinking, okay, maybe we offer the FCRA leave. We still emergency and we have a need that we're seeing individuals need to take time off for COVID, either for themselves or for family members, what do we do in these situations? Next slide, please. And this is really where you need to look at, from an internal perspective, what existing employee policies do you have in place for leave of absences? If you are an employer that has 50 or more employees within a certain mile radius, and there's the eligibility for the family medical leave that is unpaid time, but COVID leave can fall underneath that, providing it's a serious health condition, and meet all the criteria for caring for family members as well. We've included a link here as well that talks through the specifics of the family medical leave. Now, those employers maybe that are 50 and below, what can they do? Leave of absence policies, it's very important to look at your employee handbook. If you've attended any of our webinars, you know I always reference the importance of having an employee handbook. In that handbook, if you have leave of absence policies, it should spell out if you offer sick pay, how it needs to be taken. If you have paid time off or vacation time, is it required that individuals take that time prior to any leave of absence or unpaid leave of absence? Again, it's that we need to look back at what your organization currently has in play. The biggest piece is consistency in policy administration. Talked to a number of companies that have said, well, we are going to go ahead and let John off because his daughter's sick because of COVID, and we're going to just go ahead and pay him for that time out of our pocket. Keep in mind that can be a precedent-setting situation and open up your organization to risk, because if down the road, a month down the road, Bill comes in and has the same situation and he's not paid for that time, that can open your organization up for risk. So we just ask that you think, if you think through these situations, if you have questions, please reach out to us. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to help kind of talk through what those options are. Next slide, please. I think that was our previous one, Rebecca. There we go. One of the things that we do want to consider, and actually Lisa is going to be talking a little bit further about this, so I'm not going to go in depth too much on this, but if you have an employee that comes to you and says that they need to take leave because of a COVID-related illness or something related to that, keep in mind that there are other protections in place for them that fall within the Americans with Disabilities Act, or if an individual is coming in and asking for a religious accommodation, they all kind of go hand in hand. So that interactive process and learning about exactly why the employee needs the time off and the reasons for that is very crucial for you to have for your organization. And again, Lisa's going to talk a little bit further about what that looks like. Next slide. Employer concerns as it relates to vaccine policies. These are obviously very common questions right now, and we're just offering some information for you to think through how implementing mandated vaccine policies or not having any vaccine policies, how can that impact your workforce? One of the biggest pieces to remember is retention of employees. As you know, right now, the recruiting landscape is very challenging. Employers are really focused on retaining their employees. So should you decide to, whatever you decide to do in reference to policies as it relates to vaccines, please keep in mind how that can affect your organization, with either people leaving or people that are looking to come into your organization. And that's one of the next topics, is the recruitment. So as an organization, candidates are looking for organizations that have good reputations of, protecting their employees, keeping their employees safe. They might be asking, does your organization have a vaccine policy? And that can either, help to attract new employees, or it can deter. So again, keep these things in mind as you move forward. Another big question that we've been receiving a lot is in reference to unemployment claims. If an employee is terminated for violation of their employer-mandated vaccine policy, they are not eligible for unemployment. Now, there's a caveat to that. Keep in mind that if there are exceptions, as there is with anything, there's a gray area there, that if there's a reasonable accommodation situation or a religious exemption, that's all part of that discussion process. But as it stands now, the unemployment looks at this type of situation as a violation of company policy, which automatically negates that individual's ability for unemployment claims. So we expect to hear additional guidance on this as this continues to evolve. But at this point, this is what we know, and this is what we want to share as to what we are hearing out there as very common questions. And those are mainly the main things I wanted to speak to. So I'm going to turn it over to our other subject matter experts to move forward. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Leff with Huntington Insurance, and I'm going to talk to you about cleaning, inspection, and operations. Some of these things will be kind of rehashed from what we've been going through from a COVID situation over time, and how you've come back to the office. But these are good reminders. And then also, what do we need to do as we go forward? As it relates to employee retention and attracting new employees as well, there's a lot of questions from employees as they come to new potential employers on what you're doing from a COVID perspective and how they're going to feel safe in a work environment as well. So go ahead and go to this next slide, please. So we're going to talk real quickly about cleaning and inspection, and it's vital that we continue to do our cleaning operations that we were instructed by the CDC to do during COVID in the beginning, and as we continue to move forward through the variants and get ourselves out of the situation. It is the employer's responsibility to create a safe work environment, and you're seeing some of that now from an OSHA perspective, looking at overall work environments, and we're going to talk a little more about the mandate here in the next few slides with Lisa. Prior to any reopening, if there's been any exposure, if we know that there's potential there, we need to have some sort of cleaning operation, including a deep cleaning, maybe from a third party, and make sure that our environment is safe. While we know the virus is an airborne virus, there is the potential for those hard surfaces, and depending on the surface, that virus can stay alive for hours and days, depending on the type of surface that it's on. So we want to make sure that we're providing a good, clean work environment. We need to have a plan for those pieces of equipment that are shared, so copiers, phones, any type of equipment that's in our facilities, in our operations, in our offices that are considered those common elements. When we talk about cleaning and disinfecting, there's 3 different steps to a cleaning operation. Cleaning is really vacuuming, dusting, wiping things down. Then there's the disinfecting, and that's spraying a certain chemical from a cleaning operation and letting that work. And we need to be very aware of what type of chemical we're using. Number one, from an exposure perspective to our employees, you can't just go out and buy the best hospital grade stuff and think you can use it, because it might require special PPE, so personal protective equipment. In some cases, those cleaning solutions need to be sprayed wet and let them sit for a period of time. Some are spray and wipe. So make sure you're looking at the SDS or the instructions along with those chemicals so you understand what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be applying them, and what's safe for your work environment as it relates to PPE and your overall employee health. For some operations, you'll need to do some sterilization, and then that requires an additional step. So cleaning isn't just vacuuming and spraying or just walking around and spraying and wiping. It is vacuuming, dusting, then disinfecting, and then potentially sterilizing. When we talk about access to our facilities, excuse me, we need to make sure that we're still following those CDC guidelines, our local enforcement guidelines, our health department guidelines, where our controlling of our access into facilities, intermixing, where we do have spikes in the Delta and other COVID areas, we need to make sure that we're protecting the overall employees and our patrons as they visit facilities and our guests. Some cases we're still needing to do our temperature checks. So how do we do this? Well, have a single point of entry, have a single point of exit that potentially could be a different door if you have that opportunity. Make sure that there are cleaning stations, hand washing stations, sterilization stations, Purell stations as people walk in, as they get to elevators, as they're going upstairs, making sure that we're able to do some cleaning and some self-sanitizing as well as we get into the facilities. If there's one thing we need to make sure we're aware of and focus on is flexibility as well. We know that these rules have what I call accordion. They've been very lenient, they've been very strict, they've gone back to lenient, and they go back and forth. So we have to be flexible, understanding what the government's saying we're supposed to be doing, what the local authorities are saying we're supposed to be doing, and what you feel you need to do for your employees' safety. So make sure you're being flexible. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. From an operations perspective, and how do you say we're going to have a safe work environment is we're going to do that cleaning, but we're also going to have a more healthy environment to work in. And one of those things that we can do is increase our air flow or air rotation within our operation. For us, that means it's 6 to 8 air volumes per hour. So you'd have to find a cubic volume and determine what that rate is, and understand with your HVAC vendor if your system is capable of doing that. There has been and will be some additional grants by various states out there in different programs to allow for increase in that air rotation and filtration. So be on the lookout for some of those in your local areas. Some of those have expired and there are some more coming back. Why do we need to have 6 to 8 air volumes per hour? Well, that allows any airborne particulate to be sucked up into the system rather than just floating in the air or landing on hard surfaces. We also want to have some outside air makeup. So that's taking outside air. We're not just recirculating the current air, but we want to bring in some outside air. And that's about 20%. And that's the recommended number at this point. When you suck up that much air and put it through the system, now we need to do some filtration. And we want to have HEPA filtration, so high efficiency particulate filtration. And those have things called MERV ratings. And we're looking for at least a MERV 9. Would love to have about an 11 or higher, but you can't go much higher in standard systems because otherwise you'd starve the system and potentially damage the motor. There's also the ability to put in some static systems. There's ionization systems, and there's also the UV light. So there's various ways you can put additional filtration in cleaning that air for your environment. So if we improve our air rotation, if we improve our overall work environment, we're going to be much better off, and we're going to be an employer of choice going forward. And from an exposure perspective, if you're within 6 foot of an employee, of someone who is positive, and you spend 15 minutes with them, then that's considered the exposure with the CDC. So by having the additional air filtration and circulation, we're increasing the ability to stay safe when you work around people. Everyone has an ownership piece in the prevention. So it's not just the employer that is now having to do everything. The employees have to have some responsibility as well, but you need to make sure you're communicating that to your employees. And we do need to make reasonable accommodations for our employees based on what the local rules are and what's allowed as we work through the rest of the COVID situation. And with that, that's operations, cleaning, and inspection. And I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm going to turn on my webcam here. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us. I also want to take a moment to thank Ray and Associates for inviting Huntington Insurance to your educational webinar event and giving us the opportunity to participate. My name is Lisa Smith, and I'm the Vice President of Compliance, HR, and Benefits Innovation at Huntington Insurance. If we can go to the next slide, before I jump into today's content, I want to share our disclaimer up front. The legal landscape certainly continues to evolve quickly, and there's a lack of clear-cut authority or bright line rules on implementation for the upcoming OSHA ETS, at least at this time. So the information contained in today's presentation is not intended to be unequivocal, one-size-fits-all guidance, but instead represent our interpretation of where any applicable laws may lie currently and where they generally stand. We do anticipate that this guidance will change over time, So as an employer, you should remain flexible and seek up-to-date legal advice before making any workplace decisions related to COVID-19. So with that being said, next slide. On September 9th, 2021, essentially the White House released a memorandum titled Path Out of the Pandemic, which detailed President Biden's COVID-19 action plan. The memorandum contained 6 priorities for combating the COVID-19 pandemic, the most significant of which is to require employers with 100 or more employees to implement a mandatory vaccination requirement or require weekly testing of employees electing not to receive the vaccination. As a result, the Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, will soon be issuing what is called an Emergency Temporary Standard, an ETS, to implement these requirements, as well as develop a rule requiring employers to provide paid time off to employees, either for the time spent getting the vaccination or recovering from post-vaccination. Finally, to ensure that companies comply with the rule, employers may be subject to fines up to $14,000 per employee for not meeting this mandate standard. Next slide. In addition to the memorandum, the president has signed also executive orders, which essentially lay out vaccination requirements for all federal executive branch workers, including employees of federal contractors and healthcare workers, as well as mask mandates on public transportation, which will also be enforced through the doubling of fines for noncompliance. Now, it's important to understand that there's actually 2 distinct processes running in parallel that apply differently to employers of varying size and your scope of work. You have your executive order, which is 14042, requiring vaccination, and it applies to businesses of all sizes servicing federal contracts. Now, while the OSHA ETS will only apply to businesses of 100 employees or more and provides a weekly testing option. Now, while the OSHA ETS is still pending publication, it's important to note that the executive order does have an implementation deadline for full vaccination by December 8th, 2021. So next slide. So we are definitely quickly approaching the 30-day mark since the memorandum was released actually on September 9th. So what can we look forward to over the next 3 to 4 weeks, or in all likelihood longer? For starters, OSHA must first draft the new ETS to ensure that the new rule can withstand the legal challenges that have already started and without question will continue to build momentum across several states and industries. Just recently, there was a letter filed by 24 state attorneys general, including Ohio, and this letter strongly opposed President Biden's proposed COVID-19 vaccine mandate among private employers. These states have essentially threatened legal action should the mandate's efforts move forward. They specifically targeted the ETS as the crux of their argument, specifically stating that, applying a vaccine mandate is an illegal overreach. Regardless of the courtroom challenges, employers should really still be prepared with ETS compliance, as it's actually possible for employers to still be penalized for non-compliance while these lawsuits are working their way through the courts. So with that being said, probably the highest hurdle for OSHA to actually develop this ETS is to be clear and to clearly demonstrate through a series of practical questions. For example, who's going to pay for the testing? What kinds of tests are acceptable? workers, are they facing a grave danger in the workplace? While the rule is necessary to protect them, but it also has to be feasible for employers to comply with it. So there's lots of hoops and hurdles that still have to be discovered and gone through the due diligence to actually develop this ETS standard. But once the rule is established, it does get published in the Federal Register, which will very likely give employers a few weeks following that time frame to comply before it's actually enforced, which can actually happen by signaling out a high-risk industry or industries or even employees themselves that may be reporting outbreaks within the workplace. Next slide. So what next? There's little doubt that President's COVID-19 action plan closely coincided with the FDA's full authorization of the Pfizer vaccine. And now, while many employers, such as healthcare systems and airlines, have already started to implement mandatory vaccine policies, we can certainly expect to see a significant increase in the number of employers following suit. But really at this time, other than conceptuality, we really have no idea what this will look like or how this will work. But what we do know is OSHA has only issued one other ETS standard in the last 38 years. And that occurred this past June 2021, which affected or impacted the healthcare industry. The rule for which went into effect on August 20th, 2021, and throughout the entire history of OSHA's existence, only 9 ETS have ever been issued, with one of them becoming an actual official rule after challenges. So undoubtedly, the rulemaking process is certainly complex. It's extremely complex issue when it comes to just the, how this applies to so many different industries. How is it going to be efficient? There's lots of hoops and hurdles that need to take place in order to write this rule, as well as the different types of businesses and employee workforce. So if history teaches us anything, in all likelihood, the rule being issued and becoming an official rule will not come without extreme legal and political opposition every single step of the way. Next slide. So to wrap this up, it's safe to say that in general, employers can mandate vaccination as a condition for employees returning to the workplace. But in doing so, you do have to provide reasonable accommodations to those employees who cannot be vaccinated for either disability-related reasons, as well as employees who maybe refuse a vaccination because of sincerely held religious beliefs. As an employer, if you have decided to implement a mandatory vaccination policy, you are really advised to engage interactively with employees to determine any appropriate, reasonable accommodations. And in doing so, take into consideration any disparate impact or how, if enforcement of such policy may actually be discriminatory. And lastly, be sure to research any applicable state laws, especially in the states where legislators are opposed to the president's action. As I mentioned, 24 states have already filed a letter as a result of this actionable policy. So you do need to be very cognizant of what is going on within your state and just the overall process of introducing any anti-vaccine bills at the state level. Now, certainly, as an employer, David spoke to the safety of your workplace and making sure everyone is aware that this is an employer and employee responsibility. Many plans overall are looking at ways to incentivize or in some cases penalize employees who do not want to get the vaccine. So at this time, I'm going to turn over today's presentation to Alison, who's just going to speak to you momentarily on that particular topic.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. Let me get my webcam going. Hello, everyone. My name is Alison Enrico. I am the benefit coordinator for Rain Associates, and what a wealth of knowledge to follow. Thank you so much, Huntington, Lisa, and David for coming in and sharing your information, and thank you, Renee, for your information as well. David, you mentioned something about encouraging good outside air and circulation. I was just wondering, does a dying succulent and a plant half eaten by my cat help? I don't know. Maybe I can put that in the questions later. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. I'm going to cover a bit about benefit premiums and how employers are looking into ways of changing that. Lisa included a great closing point about vaccinations as a condition to work and potential disparate impact it may have on others. This also needs to be considered with caution in other areas like benefits and wellness. Not only are employers looking into vaccinations as a condition to work, let alone it being mandated for certain places, some employers are looking into vaccinations as an impact on benefit premiums as well, which is what I'll dive into. Next slide, please. So the example that I'm bringing to light is Delta Airlines. You may have seen this in the news within the last month. In a memo that was written by Delta Airlines CEO, they announced that beginning November 1st, Delta Airlines would raise employee medical premiums by $200 per month for employees who are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Primarily, this is due to help counter steep cost of hospitalizations due to COVID and encourage employees to get vaccinated. And what is said in the memo that the hospitalizations related to COVID can cost up to $50,000 per employee. So to many, this may seem pretty reasonable, a reasonable change, especially for employers who offer benefits, self-insured or not, because if unvaccinated folks are more likely to be hospitalized by COVID-19, then those hospitalizations would drive up the cost of medical claims, thus driving up the cost of medical premiums, and that's including for those who are vaccinated or not. It's pretty much anyone under that group plan. Other ramifications of COVID hospitalizations could include employees taking more time off work, COVID exposure creating a difficult environment to keep a safe and reliable service to employees and their customers, and not to mention what a scheduling logistical nightmare that could be for employers, especially in the industry of airlines, hospitals, etc. We really cannot deny the chaos that COVID has pretty much bestowed on everyone. But next slide, please. So you may be asking yourself, should I be looking into doing something like this too, especially if you offer benefits to your employees? Why wouldn't an employer want to encourage a safe environment while also saving costs on medical claims? It seems like a win-win. While we cannot really advise exactly what you should do, the best answer is not yet. The reason why is it's not an easy task to implement a vaccination surcharge due to the rules and regulations of the Affordable Care Act. ACA provisions today, they currently don't allow for a medical premium surcharge toward non-vaccinated employees. There's nothing in writing supporting that. It also does not allow for vaccination status to interfere with their affordability calculations. So it gets pretty detailed. So we might be seeing larger corporations making these big moves right now with benefit premiums and surcharges related to COVID, but they likely sought out extensive legal guidance to weigh the benefits and the ramifications of doing so. For employers like yourselves, it's advised to seek guidance from legal resources, HR, brokers like Huntington, benefit consultants, or ACA solution providers before imposing an unvaccinated penalty or surcharge on medical premiums. Next slide, please. So your next thought also might be, well, What about tobacco surcharges? Those exist? Yes, those are allowed. While it's a reasonable argument, it's still a little bit different. Tobacco surcharges are lawful, but ACA currently allows that. It's in writing in their provisions. Even then, tobacco surcharge has its own regulations within ACA standards, such as how much those surcharges can be, and also requiring programs such as free tobacco cessation for the employees. So while a non-vaccinated surcharge might deter employees from enrolling in your plan, saving you money, or motivate other employees to get the vaccination, the employer does run the risk of accruing pretty costly penalties. So back to vaccinations, there's no language under the ACA that would allow for it. Well, not vaccinations, but the surcharge for non-vaccination or vaccinated employees. But things like this can always change. We never know. It's just, there's no indication of that happening yet. So that doesn't mean that ACA will not accommodate maybe a non-vaccinated surcharge for benefit premiums in the future. But for now, we don't know. Next slide. All right, so you might be asking yourself again, if you offer medical benefits to your employees, what do you do now? What are we going to do today? Well, after dumping all that information on you, the best practice really is to wait. Again, it's not my discretion to tell you what to do. I mean, you can do whatever you want, as an employer, but you have to really consider the ramifications from a legal or compliance standpoint. There are some alternatives though. What I mentioned about a benefit surcharge is kind of more of a penalty-based incentive, but a lot of employers are looking into more of a rewards-based incentive. So again, this is if more applicable if you're offering benefits to your employees, or if you need to or have to, and you want to lower costs of claims, premiums by motivating, a vaccinated environment. Of course, you don't want to instill fear or coercion on your employees for a rewards-based incentive. So perhaps for example, a good idea, an example today is Cuyahoga County. They are offering like a cash incentive to employees who get vaccinated. So, that's something that you can consider. There's no penalty, by not being vaccinated. However, you do, before looking into a wellness or, incentive, always check your state, federal, local laws when it comes to these programs. You also need to consider with caution privacy laws, potential disparate impact in implementing health incentives. Brush up on, your HIPAA, PPACA, ADA as well, especially when it comes to documenting vaccination statuses. You want to maintain that level of privacy for your employees. You can also pay someone with credible knowledge to do that for you, like Huntington. They've been, a great wealth of knowledge, like I mentioned before. But I'll leave you with this. In the meantime, while it is within your right to do what you feel is best for your business, we will have to wait and see if any changes in legislation and guidance, and guys go from there. So I will leave you with that, and I believe our next step is for questions.
Thank you. You guys did great today. We have a few questions here. If you guys all want to pop back on the screen so we can see your faces, that would be great. And then also, if you guys in the audience have any questions, be sure to submit those now. Awesome. So it looks like everybody is here. So the first question that we have here is, can employees get unemployment compensation for the time away for COVID? Does it start at day one?
I will go ahead and take the question, as we touched on that earlier, that currently as it stands, time away for anything COVID related is not covered under any regulations other than family medical leave if that employer would qualify. So at this point, unemployment does not compensate for that.
Awesome, thank you.
Hmm?
The next question we have here is for David, I believe. It says, can you please clarify services relating to virus retention?
Sure. Any hard surface, so tabletops, counters, door handles, any hard surface can collect the virus as it drops to that surface. So any horizontal surface would be the primary, and then a vertical surface would be secondary, and those surfaces need to be cleaned on a regular basis. The types of surface, so if you like a copper surface, the virus would die within an hour-ish, 1 to 4 hours. And then there are some paper-based products where the virus can live for about 5 days. And so that's where the cleaning operation is critical.
Great, thank you. The next question we have here is, can we offer sick pay only to COVID positive employees that have been vaccinated?
That is so ask that question one more time, Imani, please, for clarification.
Sure, so it says, can we offer sick pay only to COVID positive employees that have been vaccinated?
At this point in time, again, we're not lawyers, so, but it would need to be a consistent, uniform policy for your sick leave. So not making any exceptions specifically for COVID-19. It needs to be within that policy for any leave. Lisa, I see you shaking your head. Is that
yeah,
okay?
I would concur with that. You definitely don't want to set precedent, and each and every time you have an incident come up, you're going to be tasked with that question, or questions, I should say, as to whether or not that employee is eligible. So having a consistent sick pay policy and not specifically related to COVID-19 is most likely the most easy to administer.
Awesome, thank you guys. So while we wait for more questions to come in, we might end a little bit early today. Does everyone want to go around and kind of give a quick recap? And then if we have any more questions, we can close out.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start from a recap perspective. Again, I know we've covered a lot of information here today, and we've been consistent in our webinars of providing the information that we know at this point, and many of us have referenced that this will be subject to change, and we expect to have further guidance. So please, keep in contact with us. Please plan to attend additional webinars. If you have specific questions, please reach out, as a lot of different scenarios are starting to pop up in organizations, and we're happy to help out.
So Alison, you asked earlier if the plants would be sufficient. No, not there. I would get a lot more spider plants and hang in the office if you can do some more. Those aren't generating enough oxygen for you.
Yeah. It's aesthetic.
But in general, have a process in place. Hopefully most of you already have that process in place. If you don't, I urge you to develop one. Especially if the emergency temporary standard does go into effect and you were visited because of one of the 5 reasons that OSHA comes and visits you. This one would most likely happen under a complaint, and they're hiring as many enforcement officers as they can right now. So if you have a plan in place, if this is what you say you're going to do and you record that you're going to do that, you can't just say you're going to do it. If you don't mark it down, record it, then it didn't actually happen in OSHA's view. So have a cleaning procedure, have a service company that comes out and checks your HVAC system, make sure that you're changing the filters on a regular basis to have clean and fresh air. If you do all those things and document those things, then you're going to be a leg up on everybody else, when it comes to the enforcement piece. Because OSHA is not only going to look at this vaccination piece, but then they're going to make sure that you're supplying a proper work environment. And by you having a plan in place, you will be protected. At least it's an effort. Even if they find fault in some of it, and that's fine, you've made an effort to have a proper work environment. So I urge you to put those things in place, have the cleaning procedure, check your HVAC system, and just have an overall plan.
And just to add to what David has mentioned, actually, there has been recent guidance issued by the Health and Human Services to talk about vaccinations and employees as well as customers who are being asked whether or not they've been vaccinated in the workplace. And sometimes the response is, well, that's a violation of my HIPAA rights. I don't have to answer that. The EEOC, as well as the Health and Human Services Division, has come out with recent guidance essentially stating that's not the case. This is not a violation of HIPAA policy. That customer and or client that's coming into your workplace, you have that discretionary authority to ensure, if that is your requirement, that question is being asked and answered. In the same regard, if you have temporary workers that are coming to your facilities, that temporary firm that you're working with, although you can't specifically ask those individuals, you can ask that temporary staffing firm to ensure that the only individuals coming to your workplace are those that are vaccinated. So you do have some control in what you're being allowed to ask. I do have some guidance that I can share for those that are interested. I did not include it in today's presentation because it is recent guidance, but happy to answer any other questions you may have. And I'm sure David probably has some toolkits available when it comes to authorization forms, or I'm losing my train of thought here, David, but you know what I'm talking about. So those disclaimers that someone coming in, the visitors coming into your offices, either have been vaccinated and or recently tested. I know there's lots of safety protocols that can be put in place to ensure the safety of your workplace. And we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, and I'll close with a few of my thoughts as well. So just to kind of wrap up on the benefits side of things, while there are large corporations making some pretty big decisions when it comes to how they handle their benefits and their wellness, always proceed with caution when you are doing it on your own as an employer. There's still a lot of protections and rules in place. So always seek legal guidance. Talk to your brokers. If something seems like a good idea, always think of what the pushback could be, even if it's reaching. So, just do your research, reach out to the resources that you have, and try to encourage a very, a healthy, positive, safe environment at work in any way you can.
Thank you, guys. And that did help bring in a few questions. So we'll go over those right now. The first one we have here is there a place to look for who will fall under the federal workers or employers paid by federal funds who will be required to be vaccinated? So let me repeat that because it may have come out a little bit confusing. It sounds like they're looking for resources. So it says, is there a place to look for people who will fall under the federal workers or employees paid by federal funds who are required to be vaccinated? Example, healthcare workers. So is there any resources for those people for federal funds required to be vaccinated? And we can also answer this afterwards if you guys don't have anything that you can think of right now.
I don't know if there's necessarily a database, if that's what the question is asking. I would say as an employer, you should know whether or not you're receiving any type of federal funding and or contracts that may be through your procurement department I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but I can certainly do some additional due diligence and provide a response to Renee and team.
Thank you.
Amazing, awesome. So the next question we have here is, if you have less than 100 employees, will the suggested guidance / enforcement of vaccines be required? And I don't know, you guys may or may not be able to answer this question as well, but there's that one.
Sure. So again, as it stands today, the ETS that is going to be written will be applicable to employers with more than 100 employees in the private sector. Certainly, with any legislation that's written today, if you are an employer that is below that criteria, you can certainly voluntarily comply with said compliance. You don't have to in most instances, and you will likely have some additional pushback, I would imagine, from your employees and just the overall morale. So there's different sides to putting that into consideration as a factor of employment, but certainly any type of legislation, even FCRA for that most part, you were able to voluntarily comply.
And our last question here is, has there been any indication on how we would handle testing for non-vaccinated on a weekly basis? Is this the company's responsibility or the individual?
So again, this goes back to the due diligence that OSHA has been tasked with, right? We're talking about how do we make this work? That's yet to be determined. We do know that pharmacies and retail establishments have been asked by the president to have home testing kits available. Again, begs the question, who's going to be paying for those? Is it going to be the employee who is not voluntarily complying with getting that vaccine? Is it the plan? Is it the employer? We don't know what it's going to look like. There's a lot of unanswered questions right now. So unfortunately, until we get some additional guidance, we really are going to be wondering what this is going to look like. And hopefully we will have at least some snippets of information here in the next few months.
Great, thank you guys so much. And with that, we will close out the presentation. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, HR Compliance and Insurance Benefit Perspectives, what employers should be aware of as new cases emerge. We hope that team was able to provide you with some valuable insight that will help you make sense of the current recommendations. If you sign off today and realize that you have additional questions, you're always welcome to reach out to the team by clicking the People section on the firm's website, or any of the speakers' email addresses located on the contact list. Don't forget to watch your inbox for an evaluation survey, access the recording of today's webinar, and more. Thank you again to Huntington Insurance, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, have a great day.